Hello, everyone. In this recording, we are going to speak about the developmental and environmental factors that contribute to stuttering. We touched upon these in previous classes, but now we go a little bit deeper. And in the next video is going to discuss chapter 7. I'm trying to make them shorter. So we'll talk about how the factors that are related to physical development can interfere with fluent speech. In general, you have to understand what is typical or normal, and so that you can understand what is not. So we'll talk about the role, how language development contributes to fluency or lack of it, and then we'll discuss um, how, in some cases, increasing language development may decrease these fluencies. I mean, that's a positive effect. And then we'll analyze the factors that are related to cognitive development, socio-emotional factors, and then we'll describe the evidence for the role of parenting in, for example, speech language development, and how positive parenting and the lifestyle can enhance or can make the problem worsen. So in general, overall, there are neurocognitive and language um, developmental factors that seem to be associated. But generally, um, there's the child in that period of time, especially between 18 months and 4 years, the child undergoes intensive growth in every aspect, physically, cognitively, uh, neurologically. So there's physical uh, and speech motor development, and also there's speech and language development, that spurt that occurs early in life. And then with that, we have social and emotional development as well. All of these develop on a continuum, like on a platform. Each skill is going to grow all of these little skills. So you do not have like something growing first and then the other area grows. It's all of these contribute to each other. They grow incrementally parallel. And of course, keep in mind, number one, that the neurology is a prerequisite to the neurophysiology and to the cognition. You have to have the physical brain, the flesh of the brain, that enables you to connect and to store. And the software after that is going to be the knowledge about movement, the knowledge about from the environment and the sensory mechanisms and all of this. So the environment also is believed, thought to contribute significantly. Of course, it contributes significantly to brain growth and connections, connectivity. And as a consequence, it is expected to heavily contribute to stuttering. So we speak about the parents' communication style, and then the speech and language environment, and then the life events. We spoke about these life events before, but we'll discuss them again. So the context for language development is first the overall society and then the family. So, and also um, the whole idea of what we will speak about here in this chapter and the next one will come back to this idea that the child has some predisposition. The child has some genetic abnormalities. They could be inherited, maybe not, but there's some genetic abnormality that causes the brain to grow in a different way and to connect in different ways. So people who stutter, they have thinner cortical areas and areas that are responsible for fluency. For example, like the SMA, pre-SMA, And the white motor fibers, white matter fibers are not as dense. So we know the firing rates are not normal and all of this. So the anatomy is going to not be able to produce the functions for which it is intended to produce. So that's the second stage. Now, because these areas, the physiology of the nervous system is not able to perform as it is supposed to, um, then the result is that the speech and motor planning and sequencing and coordination, all of that is going to be abnormal. And as the problem continues, when the child begins, at some point the child is not aware, but once the child becomes aware, he or she is going to start to associate the difficulties they face, the experience with negative emotions and feelings and all of this. And then every time they come to a situation that unconsciously brings up their associations, they start to stutter. And then that makes the problem worse, and it keeps one thing feeds into the other, and the problem just grows and grows to become worse unless there is intervention, and the earlier the better. So that is the whole summary. And again, we have discussed this before, but that is what the whole, especially this part, is focused on. So in terms of the context of language itself, now the child comes into the growth spurt stage between ages 18 months. That is a stage where the cortical, the bodies of neurons that reside in the cortex, the pyramidal neurons, and the neurons, the big ones that reside in the cortex, they send their axons down to connect. So you get 18 months, memory tracks begin to form because of the connectivity in the cortex, 6 layers of the cortex. Now the neurons send their fibers down, the axons down to connect these 6 layers, and then go down to connect with your with the brainstem and with the basal ganglia and lower brain systems that are gonna later enable you to regulate emotions and to feel emotions more intensely and all of this. So this is required. This is a prerequisite, the memory tract development and all of this, for language to start to grow. And this is where the child is able to remember 1, 2 words and then combine them together and then make a multi-word combination that could be a phrase. In some cases could be like a little, something like a sentence. So once this begins, in just a matter of weeks and a few months, we go from like a short phrase to a sentence. And very rapidly, the syntactic skills grow, and the child experiments and combines and makes experiments with that language. And as a result, when the child comes in to that situation, to this stage, with vulnerable, with underdeveloped motor skills, speech motor skills, that is going to increase, overload that motor system that is immature. So far, if, for example, there is no negative environment, the child continues to develop, maybe a matter of weeks, maybe a matter of a few months, up to 12 months, maybe the child can recover spontaneously. However, if the family environment is negative, that is gonna triple the effect. So you have an immature nervous system in the areas that regulate language, speech and language skills and speech fluency, and even motor deficits that can be generalized even in the motor system itself being immature. So you have this, and then the language demands are higher, and the growth of the language is higher, yet then you have the negative environment that is gonna make the recipe very bad. Excuse me. So what is, I guess, the positive thing when you look at it, all of this is that yes, there's a problem, but we can do a lot. We as SLPs, we can do a lot to prevent, to raise awareness, and to make a problem that is gonna be bad, maybe to make it go away, or maybe make it way less milder than it would be expected. So, for example, conditions in the family could be competition among the siblings, especially a child who has the parents all for himself or herself, and for a number of years, and then all of a sudden you have a sibling that who's gonna come and share that. So there will be that jealousy. There will, I mean, horror stories sometimes you hear about children who have a sibling born, and they try to hurt the child, the baby, and so on. So that is could be, but another one is when the siblings try to communicate and they each one wants to talk and the other one interrupts and there is no time, no one to regulate, so that everyone can take time to talk and to be listened to, then the situation becomes conducive to stuttering. And then the competing demands in the home and in school. One of the children I worked with, his parents, especially, I mean, both of them, I saw the mother and I think I did see the father, but I had more interactions with the mother. She was an architect, and I was told before even I saw her, she was perfectionist, and they designed this $2 million home. 2 million, to like, we're speaking many years ago. I mean, it's probably today will be worth maybe 6 million. So they designed that house of the dreams, and um, they made sure everything in it is immaculate. When you would go to the house, it's almost like you shouldn't walk on the floor. Take your shoes outside, go in, and the house just gleaming, beaming hardwood floors, shiny. And so the child was put under a lot of stress. When the children go to school, they are under pressure. They are like, this coil that you compress, and then if you keep it like this for a long, long time, it's going to be damaged. So you need the child needs to come back from school and just relieve that tension, to have some time to be free, to be, So anyways, when the child goes from the school environment like this and goes to the house environment, to face the same strictness, maybe even more. Okay, wake up, make your bed before you even go, then do this, do that, do that, and you come back and you go through these routines and your homework, and you have to be this, you have to be perfect. So that this kind of upbringing and that style is negative. It will have, we don't, I mean, people can live their life the way that they want, but if they, when that is affecting a child who is vulnerable, they have to change. They have to change that, and of course they will, because they want to help their children, and they don't know, but you are the expert. So another one is the communication style, fast pace, talking, not much time. I have to run. My foot is out the door. The other legs inside the door. Uh, there is no time. Okay, we'll talk later. With this, that, and then the child is feeling the frustration. That is one thing. The other thing is speaking and looking at the child. Look at me, say this, and they start to be over judgmental. the child in that case is going to try to avoid, because every time they come to be judged and the parent is not listening to what they want to say, the parent would be focused more on how you are going to say what you want to say. So that is going to also not giving the child enough time to finish and to be listened to. All of these things are going to make the child always thinking, when will I be interrupted? So they rush to put in what they want to say, and then they're just afraid they might be interrupted all the time. They develop this as a habit, and it can accelerate the rate of their speech and the way that they want to just, say it. Even they might even interrupt at some point inappropriately. So also a perfectionist parent, authoritative, judgmental, commanding, do this, do that, and not allowing much time to spend with the child and to give the child the time. So these are very, very important, and definitely not to bring anything to the child to say you are stuttering, or bring that behavior to the child, especially the young ones who are not aware. So we as SLPs have the responsibility, and we have the skills, and we can remove these barriers, and by doing so we can stop a problem from actually occurring, from continuing to be a real stuttering. And if the child even, for example, had some predisposing genetic factors, and they are expected to grow to be severe stutterers, with the intervention, that stuttering could be just mild, could be maybe, it will be less severe than the one that they grow up with. So there are many, of course, hypotheses about how stuttering begins, what causes stuttering. But in terms of the cause, there is no evidence to say definitively this is why it's, what causes it. And a lot of these assumptions and stuff, all based on association studies. Like you see someone who smokes and say he's coughing, and they say everyone who smokes coughs. So smoking causes coughing. For example, one study at some point said authors, people who write like novels and books and stuff, they tend to have depression. And I didn't believe that. Of course, it is just, think about it this way. People who write, why would they write? Because before they want to make money, they want to enjoy what they write. They find their voice in writing. Wouldn't that be an incentive that when they have the depression in the first place, they go into writing in order to relieve these emotions? So looking at this way, I mean, and I want you to look at these things with an open mind. Try to analyze yourself, try to come up with an idea of your own, because these are associations. We are not certain. So also, there's research to show that in certain societies, there is stuttering is so rare, and in some cases, there are not even I guess they report New Guinea, and some a few places, for example, like the polar Eskimos, they do not have um, people who stutter, and the Australian natives. So in some of these languages, even they do not have a word for stuttering. So, but again, these are studies that try to prove that societies that are fast-paced, societies that have more interest in, or that recognize the value of communication really well, especially spoken language. They put a lot of emphasis on how you talk and the etiquette and all of this. that they tend to be more judgmental, and that causes stuttering rates to be higher in these societies like the US and in Japan. In any case, since there's even a hint that these environmental factors contribute, that strengthens the our role as SLPs and what we can do to fix these, because we can remove these barriers. So we do know that children, there's a relationship between language and stuttering, especially because when the child begins to develop multi-word combinations, then stuttering begins. It rarely, you don't notice it like when the child has one word to say. So that we know this for sure. But so again, it seems that as stuttering continues, it becomes worse over time. And because language and cognition and all of these skills grow and develop rapidly, and the demands become greater on the cognitive system and the language. And of course, you need cognitive skills to also enhance language and use it. So there's competition for cognitive resources, and that would overload the system, and it would make the child unable to cope with all these demands, and that will be reflected in the difficulty in coordination and the ability to regulate all these 105 muscles to work together and do the work that we take for granted. Also, there is research to show that as the child's language progresses and improves, and the child is able to use syntactic skills more efficiently, then this fluencies decrease and the stuttering goes away. And they see that as the MLU, for example, mean length of utterances, becomes longer, and that usually is a sign of linguistic complexity, that is going to increase the rate of disfluencies in the speech for some weeks, some maybe a few months. But after that, as the child improves, then this will fade out gradually, and the child doesn't display anything that is not normal. The same idea. So now we started with the genetics, and then the genetics give rise to the abnormal formation in certain areas, especially the ones that regulate fluency behavior. Then also the circuits, the neural pathways that connect these areas are not functioning well, and the firing rates aren't. So these are the neurobiological factors. Okay, neurobiology is anatomy plus physiology. So these factors together are going to put the person at risk for stuttering when the language spurt begins, and more than that, when the family situation and the environment is negative. So that is one thing goes to exacerbate, to add, to compound this problem and make it, with time, if there is no intervention, with time, the problem is going to develop into real stuttering. So again, this is what I explained. It is hypothesized that stuttering emerges as the at-risk child who has these neurobiological abnormalities or immaturities reaches the language growth spurt, and then the situation, is going to burden these already vulnerable circuits and areas, and that is going to produce that stuttering. When the nervous system catches up, then that is where the 85% move on and they do not stutter. And for the other ones who, the 15% who remain to stutter through life, they are the ones who have either the genetic, strong genetic component and or the negative environment too, maybe. But again, keep in mind, we do not know for sure. So, but the idea is as the language demands overtax that nervous system that's immature, when you have many pieces to coordinate together and sequence together, and these areas are, some of them are not mature and some are not moving in synchrony, that will cause the child to start to repeat things and, so sounds, syllables, prolong, and to prolong certain sounds and to even start to block. The delay, language delays, again, the, there is some evidence, of course, a lot of evidence to show that there's an association, for example, between stuttering and genetic and neurogenetic factors. But it is not quite clear how language impairments, language delay, might contribute to the problem. In other words, if it was contributing for sure, then you would have you would say any child who has a language delay could be at risk, but that is not the case. So, but again, we have hypotheses. So some think that the language delay may be a contributing factor, but others think that the language delay, in addition to the stuttering, they are both a result of a common cause. And if you do that, the common cause is going to be the anatomy itself. So that is possible. How does cognitive development contribute to the process? How does it contribute to stuttering? We know that there are three big components for stuttering: the core behaviors, secondary behaviors, and then the feelings and attitudes. So a child who is cognitively mature early, 3 years old or so, between 3 and 4, they reach that awareness and say, oh, people notice when I do this or do that. They are not going to know how to call it, but they notice people's reaction, and then they will start to develop negative feelings and attitudes, and they become more aware of that, and that is going to create the fear and the stress, and then the cycle of anxiety that causes stuttering to be worse. And then the worse stuttering is, the worse the anxiety becomes, and it keeps feeding one into the other. So in general, spoken language heavily depends on neurocognitive functions. It depends on executive functions to regulate and to coordinate what you say, what the other person says, to monitor the environment, to organize what you want to say, to retrieve your vocabulary, to put that in sentences. A lot of functions that are happening, like a very, very busy factory assembling something in just in milliseconds. So the executive functioning is critical, and also perception. How, when you have like your background knowledge, will serve as a background to interpret what you see based on what you know, and then you need attention also, and you need working memory. So the cognitive maturation increases awareness in general, and it contributes to the emotional aspect because the child is aware. But also, the executive functioning and perception, all of this, if they are, for example, not functioning well, that could make also the problem worse for the child to develop the language skills, and it would increase the linguistic demands too. So the immaturity in the nervous system in general, you remember you need the anatomy to function well, and part of that anatomy we are speaking about is motor. And motor needs planning and needs feedback and all of this. And then that part of the planning is cognition. You want to make a movement, but you want cognition to decide, when am I going to talk? How am I going to do this? What this? So if the system itself and the anatomy is immature, and the cognitive system itself is not mature, that is going to make the situation more complicated, definitely. The research on emotions, there's a lot, but again, it is not as clear. So many studies would show that children who stutter tend to have more social and emotional problems during the preschool. But it's not clear if these are a result of the stuttering or if they cause or contribute to the stuttering. So when children are emotionally excited, usually, fluency may be affected. And that is the idea that if children experience an intense emotional stress or some kind of stressor, that could induce the fight or flight response, and it could increase the pressure on speech, especially if the child is already vulnerable and these neural pathways are not connecting well in the first place. So that's going to make the problem even worse. So what we have, again, multiple factors contributing to and affecting the neurology, affecting the neurobiology. So you come back to that idea, that theme frequently. So when we speak about social emotional learning in the early stages of life, it doesn't develop, like skills do not develop like evenly here and there. And the child goes through stages. Some stages are easier for the child to handle, and some stages are hard. For example, there is a stage when the children just cry for the smallest thing and they stomp and they just cannot easily work with you. The emotional system is in the basal ganglia and the amygdala. The amygdala is the big part processing emotions. And then you have the insula beneath that is a major contributor to what you call the brain default mechanism. But what it does also, the insula, that is the one that is buried under the operculi in between the temporal lobe and the frontal and the parietal. If you just open it up, you will see the insula. It translates your emotions, that emotions you are not aware of them, but you just feel them. But when you become like consciously aware of your emotions, you can say, I feel happy, I feel sad. That becomes a feeling. So the insula connects your emotions that you are not aware of with your awareness, and then you start to feel your emotions. And when you do that, you feel them physically. So it translates emotions into physical sensation. That's going to make your heart pound, that's going to make your throat dry, whatever it is. So all of this is connected with speech. And there is also the stimulation from outside is going to also interact with the temperament. Temperament, a big part of it is genetic. Okay, temperament, a big piece of it is inherited or genetic to say. Not necessarily that the parent is like this and the child has to be like that. So, but definitely it's a big, if not all of it, it's a big piece of it is in the genes. So, for example, you might find someone who's just very calm and relaxed by nature and smiling at you, and whatever happens in the world, that person doesn't even care much. Or someone who's always hyper, always looking agitated and looking for a fight. And so temperament is like this. But of course, the environment shapes it significantly. So part of that, for example, is self-regulation that regulates temperament. Self-regulation, you can see it in a baby who's 3 months old, even earlier. When you see the baby crying and crying, and then no one comes or something, and the baby starts sucking her thumb or making noises, that is self-regulation. Some kids self-regulate, trying to make themselves falling asleep by making noises and singing to themselves. This is all self-regulation. You can see it very, very early in life. So all of the environment outside can make someone lose the ability to regulate, to self-regulate, can affect the temperament to agitate, cause the temperament to be worse as the child grows. So um, all of these factors are going to play into the like interact with the negative environment if the child is facing the negative things that we discussed in the family, and all of this that's going to cause more behavioral problems, and the that is going to eventually create that cycle about the negative emotions and feelings about stuttering. So because of that role, it shows that we as SLPs can do a lot to prevent and do a lot to contribute to these children and to improving their lives, to remove the barriers in the environment that can make their problem worse or can create the problem in the first place. So there is no evidence, of course, to show that the parents are the cause of, to cause someone to stutter. Unless, of course, the child suffers some kind of brain damage because of abuse or because of a fall or whatever. And some of this might go unnoticed sometimes. So anyways, the research shows that children who stutter, they tend to have parents who are more demanding, I mean, some at least, or to expect perfection from their kids. Um, so speech and language, the speech and language environment itself, um, how the child speaks with the parent, if the parent is negative, if the parent herself or himself serves as a poor language model for the child. In other words, if the parent speaks very fast, the child will learn to speak fast. And also, depending on, for example, the use of complex vocabulary and complex syntax. Frankly, I would say through my own experience, complex vocabulary and complex syntax, they are not necessarily a cause, but again, if you put the vulnerable neural circuits, the underdeveloped neural circuits, and then the linguistic demands, and and that for a child who already has the predisposition, then you can say yes, the more complex vocabulary and more complex syntax may be contributing. But it's not like if when you speak with the child normally and you use higher level vocabulary, that the child is going to, no, that's not the case. Myself, as a speech pathologist, my late wife was an SLP as well, and we just spoke to the kids, three kids, like we spoke with each other. I mean, we just speak this complicated vocabulary. All our kids have like 99th percentile vocabulary skills. So this doesn't cause, but again, there has to be the vulnerability first for these particular kids. So stressful speaking environments again, um, when the child knows he or she is going to be interrupted and is not taking his time, no one is listening much to him or her. Competition for speaking among siblings, and also um, the loss of listeners' attention. So these kids need to be listened to. We need to focus more on what they want to say, because the problem is when the parent becomes the therapist and becomes the teacher. No, I mean, you just live your role as a parent. Do the things I want to ask you to do. Sit with the child. Even when you talk with the child yourself, you have to talk at a slower rate, relaxed. Maybe sit down. If it is nighttime, just dim the lights a little bit, not to have them so bright, so that not to stimulate the nervous system. So that relaxed atmosphere is going to relax anyone, not just someone who stutters, but anyone who speaks with you. A lot of life events, again, these are based on association studies. We discussed this before, and this is, I don't need to read the list to make the video longer, but also, since at least a few studies brought them up, we need to consider everything when we do the evaluation, when we send the case history, when we interview, we need to look for these factors. Maybe even if it's 1% chance that maybe one of these is contributing, it is worth it. We explore it because we don't know, the cause. And again, here's the summary. This is most of the areas. So this is from the textbook. The parents' speech and language environment, life events, and gives you a good, reasonable summary. So then we move on I'm going to record the second part, which is going to be chapter 7. I hope that we can this can be available soon.